Hello, everyone. I hope your week is off to a good start. We're continuing with another lecture. This time, we're going to talk about ethics and politics of research. Why is ethics important in communication research? Think about some of the decisions that you would need to make if you were to conduct a research study. Some of those questions include: would you expose participants to violent material? Would you do something like that? Think about it for a second. I would, but there are certain steps that I would take before exposing participants to violent material. If I want to see how they react to it, I would certainly make sure that to inform them about the experiment that I'm conducting. I want to make sure that I'm providing all the information to them about my research study, that they're aware what kind of research they're going to be engaged with, so there are no surprises for them. So I'm not doing something that could be considered unethical. So if I believe that this study would be highly beneficial for the society, I would conduct it, but I would make sure that all my participants are aware what kind of research they're being involved with. So, another question that you could ask is: would you accept research funding from a source that hopes your research results will help promote its products and services? What do you think about that? Well, if you engage in such things, perhaps you're working for an agency, advertising agency, or a company, and you're just doing this research for them, or if you're doing such research and you're not affiliated with the company whose products you're producing, I think you should be upfront about who is sponsoring your research. So you need to make sure that you're revealing this information, because you don't want to deceive anyone who is receiving information about your research study. Or would you monitor people's behavior without their knowledge and consent? What do you think about that? Let's say you go to a bar and you want to see how people are interacting with their smartphones, or how people interact with each other, and you don't want to inform them about it. Would you let them know that you're actually observing them, or would you just be quiet about it? What do you think? Let's take a look at some of the examples where such research could be ethical, and some examples where your decision might not be ethical. So, what is ethics? Ethics is the study of right or wrong. Are you doing a wrong thing if you're observing somebody without them knowing that you're observing them for your research study? So, this is a study of responsibility, and in the research context, it is the study of appropriate behavior toward participants. So, in the case of observing people and not telling them that you're observing them, if you want to use that information that you collected without them knowing about it, you need to first make sure that you provide complete anonymity. And also, if you feel it is important, you need to tell the participants, tell the people that you were actually later, once you collect all the data, you can tell them that you were actually observing them for your study. So let's take a look at what kind of research do we have? What kind of measures do we have if we observe people when they're not aware of it? We call that the unobtrusive measure. So you can observe people and you can collect data about their behavior, but you need to make sure that you don't identify these people in your report, or you don't provide any. And by identifying people in your report, I don't mean only providing their names and last names, but I also mean providing any information that would make them identify, that would kind of identify, that would make them identify easy with it. So you want to make sure that you're fully protecting their privacy. Some examples: one of the examples that I mentioned is people's use of smartphones while they're at the bar with friends. So you want to see how people behave when they're at the bar? Are they actually focused on their friends and the conversation that they're having with their friends, or are they just on their smartphones doing something else and not really paying attention what people around them are doing? Another, this is related to also unobtrusive measures, but one of the questions that I wanted to ask you in relation to the previous example is, if you want to check whether people are wearing seatbelts when driving, would you let them know about your research intent or not? Do you think they should know if you're actually observing them or not? What do you think about it? Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this example for a moment. You should not tell people that you are observing them because you want to collect data that is accurate. But perhaps, um, but you want to make sure once you collect this data that you're not providing any identifiable information. So you're not going to say something like, "Oh, this guy with beard who was driving Toyota Camry, blue Toyota Camry in Pleasantville at this time was not wearing a seatbelt." So you don't want to provide any information that could be identifiable. So you want to make sure that you're protecting people's privacy. But in this case, you don't want to let them know that you're actually observing their behavior. Why? Because that behavior could change. The same thing applies to the situation where we had people who spend more time on their smartphones than communicating with their friends when they're at the bar. If you were to tell them, yeah, hey, I'm doing a research on how much time people spend on their smartphones when they're sitting at the bar with their friends. So I just want to kind of observe your interactions, and I want to see how much time you actually spend on your phone and how much time you spend talking to your friends. So if you tell them this in advance, they could change their behavior. So you're not really collecting real life data, and you want to make sure that you're collecting accurate information for your research. So for that reason, you want to make sure that you're not revealing to them that you're collecting information, but also when you're collecting such information using this unobtrusive measure, like not trying to impact the research data collection by telling your participants, people that you're actually observing them. So you just want to make sure that you're not telling them, but you want to make sure that you're not providing any identifiable information once you publish your data. What are some of the ethical issues that could emerge in research? So, some of the things that we should consider first is when setting up a research study, and I'll talk about it in more detail in my next lecture. One of the things that you should consider is um, the first thing that you're actually going to do when you start conducting research. So you pose a research question, and then the next thing you want to do, okay, I want to study this, but what is my next step? I actually really want to see what other scholars, what other researchers produced in this area, what kind of information, what kind of data, what kind of analysis did they provide, what kind of knowledge did they supply us with, so we can start with that knowledge, and then our research, the goal of our research is kind of to fill the gap in that knowledge. So what the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to look at, we're going to review the literature. We're going to look at different studies related to the same phenomenon. We're just going to look at what they have to say about, for instance, people smartphone use when they're socializing with friends outside of their apartments. So you want to look at different studies that deal with this phenomena, and then you're going to write a literature review. That will be the basis of your research. So you're going to start with a literature review, but when you're doing literature review, you need to make sure that you are attributing every information collected from different research studies to the sources that you collected that information from. So if there are authors who worked on a study before you about people's social interactions and smartphone use, you are going to cite those studies and make sure to provide the author's names. So when writing a literature review, you just really want to make sure that you're including references to your sources, that you're crediting information collected from other people's study in your work. Another thing is be honest. It is important when when I mentioned this example at the beginning, would I just um, expose people to some violent material? Uh, if it is important, if I think I would collect some really important information that will help us better understand the society or prevent certain problems in the society by analyzing how people react to this violent content, then of course I would expose them if I feel it's very beneficial for us as a society to have such information. But I would make sure to let my participants know what is it that I'm doing and why is it that I'm collecting such information. So I would make sure that they know that they'll be watching some violent content. Another thing is debriefing. So if you're collecting some data and you feel like after collecting that data, and or let's say you use some manipulation, you feel like you didn't tell people. I'll tell you one example. For instance, let's say you come to my class and somebody instructs you to, and you're participants in this research study. Somebody instructed you to not pay attention to what I'm saying, to just simply ignore me the entire time and just, browse the web or spend time on social media, simply completely disregarding my lecture. And then the goal of that research study is to see how I'm gonna behave. So I have no idea that you were instructed to act that way, and maybe my behavior will be changed because I can see that no one is paying attention to what I'm saying, so I'm maybe not as motivated to deliver an effective lecture if you're not paying attention, or maybe it will make me upset. So whoever instructed you to act that way is collecting data about my behavior, like how this audience disengagement with the speaker is actually affecting that speaker. How is it affecting their speech, the lecture delivery? So, but the briefing is basically letting the people know later, like letting me know, for instance, that this was actually an experiment. We just wanted to see what happens when audience is acting as completely disengaged from the speaker. So how does it affect the speaker, et cetera, et cetera. So it is really important when you use some conditions, specific conditions, when you're like manipulating the situation just to see how people will behave. It is very important to later tell those people that they were part of the experiment, that their data will be completely private. You were just conducting a study, blah, 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 and so on. So, so that is one of the ways to address these ethical issues that could happen in research. Another thing is generalizations. So remember that if you, let's see, survey 30 students on the Pleasantville campus about how do they feel about this remote learning thing, and the majority of them says, well, we don't really like it, we prefer being inside a classroom. And then you say that PACE students prefer being taking in-person classes than taking online classes. You're not really being honest. Like interviewing or serving 30 students out of what's the number of students at PACE University? It's like serving such a small number of students and coming to this conclusion. You should not you should not generalize it. Like you should not use like 30 students to make these statements that should apply to the entire PACE student body. No, you really need to make sure that the sample that you're using is generalizable, that you have a certain number of students representing the entire population, and that you have diversity in your sample. So it has to be males and females need to be represented in your sample, and you need to make sure that you have different race represented in your sample. So you really need to do a systematic research, and you need to make sure that you have a sample that is generalizable, so you can draw conclusions that could be applied to the entire PA student body. Otherwise, don't make any generalizations based on like such small samples that are not representative of the entire population. Use appropriate language. What does it mean? When you will read more and more of these scholarly articles, research studies, you'll see how they're using this very complex academic language. And they use also statistics, and I'm sure that you will not be able to understand a lot of it, especially when it comes to like statistical analysis. We won't be covering like them in detail in this class. We're just going to cover the basics. So they could be really complex to read if you're not uh, in that area. So you don't want to present such language to your participants. When you are presenting, when you're explaining to your participants what kind of research they're going to be involved in, you want to make sure that you're using plain language, that you're using the language that they understand. So explain research not in those academic terms, explain your research to them in their language. Another thing is you need to make sure to acknowledge others. So as I mentioned in your literature review and everywhere else, whenever you use somebody else's ideas, you need to make sure that you're citing them in your study. So don't forget that. If you're using data from another study, you need to state in your research who wrote that study. So you need to cite sources in your study. You can't just take information from other sources without including any references and citations to those sources. And finally, anonymity, confidentiality. When you are, I gave you an example of unobtrusive measures, and this also applies to um, many other ways of conducting research, such as if you're doing a survey, you want to provide anonymity to your survey respondents. You don't want to provide any identifiable information because you want to obtain responses that are honest, and you want to make sure that people can simply that people can be protected from what they said in that survey. It is important when we're collecting survey data that we obtain honest responses from the participants, because we want to collect data that we could generalize. And it is very important for people to provide honest answers to frequently very sensitive questions. It is important that we reassure them that their answers, everything they say, is going to be completely confidential and anonymous. How do we make ethical decisions? So people can, there are different positions, different ethical positions. So some would say that, if this is a good thing for the majority, then we should simply accept it. So what position is it? Great is good for the greatest number. That is the third position on the list, but let me start with the first one that I listed here. The first one is Judeo-Christian position. So it's basically do unto others as you would have them do to you. So don't do things that, if you want to participate in a research study, actually, one of the things that you should ask yourself, like, do I want to participate in my research study? So if you think that you would participate in your research study, then everything is fine. Like it looks like that your study has no ethical issues. So if you would want to participate in it, so if you would have somebody do something to you, if you're okay with that, then then I believe that other people will be okay if you do the same thing to them. Another position is by famous philosopher Immanuel Kant. That position is called categorical imperative, and it means that a behavior is valid if you're willing to accept it as a universal rule. So if you're willing to behave that way, and if you're willing to see everyone behave that way, then that behavior is valid. And the position that I mentioned at the beginning is great is good for the greatest number. This position is called utilitarianism, and some of the philosophers who stand behind this position are Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and David Hume. And finally, John Rawls' veil of ignorance. That means to be completely dispassionate as a researcher. So just ensure to review all sides of decision equally. So that was his ethical position. Why in today's, when we conduct research these days, we need to go to certain procedures to include that the research we're working on is actually ethical. So what are the reasons for this? One of the reasons is the famous Tuskegee study. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this is one of the biggest scandals in American history, science. What happened is that medical researchers launched this study in 1932. It was the study aimed to examine the effects of untreated syphilis. So the study ran from 1932 to 1972. In this study, as many as 600 African American men participated. 390 of them had syphilis. They were not told the truth about this research. They actually did not know all the details about the study. And on top of everything, they didn't, even though the researchers knew that they had syphilis, these people did not receive treatment. And the treatment was available because as of 1943, penicillin was used to treat syphilis, but these people were not receiving it. And then in 1972, I believe the Associated Press published a study, published this information about that study, and then the study was finally terminated, and the remaining participants received medical treatment. So the biggest scandal about this study is that people were not receiving treatment. Many of them died. But the real effects of this study, we don't even know, because we don't know how many people got infected during that time, because they had interaction with people who were infected, and also we don't know, we're not even aware of all the consequences of this study. But basically, when the data was revealed about the Tuskegee study and this unethical treatment of study participants, then some changes were made in research, and I'll touch upon them later. But the reason why they decided to introduce this ethic code, so I mentioned the example of the Tuskegee study, is to protect research participants, because as you can see in this study, research participants were not protected. So they were running the study from 1932 to 1972, and they were not giving proper treatment to those people who were infected. We have multiple codes of ethics. So the first one is Nuremberg Code. The name of the code is from Nuremberg trials. The code was established in 1948, and the reason for establishing this code was because prisoners were used in Nazi concentration camps for medical experiments, and to prevent this from happening again, they established the Nuremberg Code, which is basically reflected. This code is reflected in two major rules. One of them is that participant must consent to research, so you can't just be a participant, which is what happened in concentration camps with prisoners. They never consent to be part of that research, but they participated in medical experiments against their will. And then another rule was that research benefits must outweigh risks. So we need to make sure that the benefits of our research are bigger than the risk that we could we would impose participants to in order to collect data. Another code of ethics is Declaration of Helsinki from 1964. Uh, a research study needs to be reviewed by an independent committee. Participants in a research study need to sign an informed consent. Research should be conducted by qualified individuals, and research benefits should exceed research risks, just like in the case of Nuremberg Code. When it comes to Tuskegee study, one of the the report, the code established after Tuskegee study is embedded in the Belmont Report, published in 1979. So just several years after the Tuskegee study was terminated. So, and we're still looking at this Belmont Report when we want to launch and conduct a research study that involves human subjects. What are some of the basic elements of the Belmont Report? And these are the elements that all researchers need to look at when launching and conducting a research study. So the first one is respect for persons. So you need to provide information that people can understand. So as I mentioned, you're using one language to address the academic community and to tell them about your research, about your data, about your analysis, but then you really need to use a simple language when communicating with your potential participants about the study that you're working on. And you need to make sure that the people participating in your study are participating on a voluntarily basis. So they're not, they know that they are participating and they want to participate in your study. Beneficence: maximize benefits and minimize harms, and justice, fair procedure, and outcomes in selecting research subjects. This report, the Belmont Report, it was prepared by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects and Biomedical and Behavioral Research. We're actually going to learn more about the Belmont Report this semester. I have an exercise for you, so you'll be able to get acquainted with more details about this report and the Tuskegee study. So, what are some of the things that came out of this Belmont Report? So, first of all, maybe you've heard of the IRB. Maybe some of your colleagues, students, peers who had a chance to produce like a conference paper or master thesis or some really strong research study, they had to go through this IRB process, and you will go through that IRB process this semester as well. So it's an IRB is actually an institutional review board. So what is the point of having an IRB at every university? This is a formal review mechanism established to review research proposals for the impact on human participants. So basically, the IRB is ensuring we're asking the IRB to provide an approval to us to conduct a research study, and they want to make sure that the research you're conducting is ethical. So this is why we have this review board, and we have it at PACE as well. Peer review is another way of making sure that your research is ethical. So what does it mean? So let's say I just produced a research study and I want to publish that research study. So I'm going to submit that research study to a journal, but I'm not going to have that study published right away. That the study will go to the anonymous peer review. So 2 or 3 people who also have a PhD and who have knowledge about the area that my article is related to, they are going to look at the study, they look at my method, my literature review, to like the entire structure, content, and everything else to make sure that I'm actually providing some quality research, that I'm contributing to the academic knowledge. So they're going to either approve my study or reject it. So that's part of this process. I mentioned the concept of anonymity when I discussed research, and one of the things that we can see today is more and more people are conducting internet research. So they're trying to collect survey. Um, they're trying to collect survey responses via the internet, or they're trying to collect data on social media such as Twitter and Facebook. So, how do we do this internet research, and how do we make sure that we are still ethical when collecting data on the internet? It is great that we have this rapid access to a large number of research participants, and we can collect a lot of data at the low cost. So, these are some of the advantages of internet research. Um, but And other advantages is you can basically do a content analysis by just like looking at tweets published by different people online, because if their accounts are unlocked, if they're publishing things on Twitter, you can collect that data because that information is publicly available. But there are also some disadvantages when it comes to internet research. One of them is um, conceptual problems defining the internet. So this internet can be regarded both as process and content. Another problem is practical. So there are problems of sampling, obtaining consents, and establishing the authenticity of participants. So you don't know if you collect survey data that maybe one person responded to your survey 5 times, or how do you sample participants? So they're not representing the entire population because there are still people in the country who don't use the internet. And of course, obtaining consent. How do you obtain consent? Is usually when you are about to fill out the survey online, you go and you're asked to accept to actually participate in the study. So sometimes obtaining consents can be challenging, especially so with surveys. It could be actually easier because you ask them at the beginning of your survey if they agree to participate in it or not. But when it comes to, let's say, collecting information from closed groups on social media, just getting in touch with people and getting informed consents could be a bit challenging. So let's just take a look at some of the key concepts from this lecture. So confidentiality is one of them. You need to make sure that everything, all the information you collect, especially when collecting information from human subjects through interviews and surveys, everything needs to be confidential. Belmont Report is like provides some form of background in research in the US. So as of that report, we had to go through this thorough process of obtaining an approval for conducting a research study, just to make sure that we're not causing any harm to the participants. Provide anonymity to your participants. Look at ethical principles. Think about what is right or wrong. Which position do you embrace? Peer review. Remember that there will be somebody at your level who will be reviewing your study. IRB, Institutional Review Board, you will go through that process to publish your research. And debriefing. If you're manipulating some condition, if you need to tell people that they participated in your study. You need to inform people that you were collecting data about them. So I have an assignment for you. So in order to conduct a research study, you need to complete the SITI program training. So I want you to go to their website. So I'll just tell you like which steps you need to take. So you basically need to complete these 2 courses about how to conduct an ethical research, and then after completing those courses, you'll be able to set up a research study and then ask for an IRB approval for your study. So this is the first step that you need to do. Go to this website, create an account, and then when you're prompted to enroll in the appropriate courses, select human subjects research and responsible conduct of research. Then 2 courses will appear on the next page: responsible conduct of research and social behavioral research. Complete both and download certificates. You will get the certificates after completing the course. So download both certificates and then submit them under assignment CITI training. Okay. If you have any questions about this, just let me know. These are my references, and thank you for your attention. Again, if you have any questions about the CITI training or anything like that, just send me an email. But if you just click on that link and go to their website, you'll be able to register and to complete those two courses. Thank you again for listening and have a great week.